intended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of the now. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them, your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers, unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar, and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer would be truly returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, and my word be easy and delightful.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the ground illuminated temple of liberty, and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems, were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view, standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command. Yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is in just this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade and rebuke less? Your cause will be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. One point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. It is not astonishing, is it not astonishing, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, and acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would make me myself ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men workers? To rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is human cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would, today, pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that, for the revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now, and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. In several states, this trade is the chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror which the foreign slave trade is contemplating. That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by the Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for cotton. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you. A man drover. They inhabit all the southern states. They preamble the country and all the highways of the nation, with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh joggers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his human blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on as a frightened captive. There, see the old man, with locks thinning and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she had been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered on the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow the droves to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet, this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the United States. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit,
I see the clouds of dust rise on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wails of the victims sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust and caprice precisely of the buyers and sellers of men.
By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is a hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God, that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the last 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all the rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For black men, there are neither law, nor justice, humanity, nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 millions of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that in one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than the ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose. A seventh part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery it destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a word to a mocking earth. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away, fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying,
All gods speed, the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, in each return for evil, good, now blow for blow. That day will come, all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe. Good job. One more time to clap for everybody who read today. As stated earlier, I'm Kiana Pierre-Louis. I am not from Norwood, don't judge me. I live in the neighboring town of Sharon. I'm actually the chair of the select board in Sharon right now. I am an associate dean at Northeastern School of Law. But really, this is my passion. I used to be a professor. I used to teach business law classes, but also I would teach race and law, social justice law at my alma mater, Bentley University. So I am going to give you a slight history lesson, and the professor in me may ask some people out in the audience to answer some questions, but also give some background on why Frederick Douglass gave this speech, why he gave it the day he did. But I think my biggest feat for right now is going to be able to read my notes with this mic and make sure that the wind doesn't blow them away. So give me something. But I think I can do this because I know pretty much. So today I do want to share with you the remarkable journey of Frederick Douglass, and you've heard a little bit about him before. He's a man whose legacy in life continued to inspire us, particularly me. Born into slavery in Maryland, Douglass escaped the bounds of servitude in 1838 and eventually settled in New Bedford, Mass. In 1845, he courageously published his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Not only was this just a powerful account that detailed his harrowing experience, but it also boldly announced that he was an escaped slave. So consequently, Douglass had to flee to England to evade capture by slave catchers. During his travels to England, he lectured, and then eventually his supporters bought his freedom. Douglass emerged as a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York. Abolitionists often praised him as the living counterexample of the arguments of slaveholders, who often claimed that slaves lacked the intellectual capacity to function as independent American citizens. Douglass fervently believed in equality of all people, regardless of race, gender, origin, whatever it was. He valued dialogue and alliances across racial and ideological divides. I'm going to just say that one more time. He valued dialogue and alliances across racial and ideological divides, and he upheld the liberal values enshrined in our U.S. Constitution. With radical abolitionists criticized his willingness to engage in dialogue with slave owners because he wasn't willing to do that. Douglass famously replied, "I would unite with anybody to do right and nobody to do wrong." In 1852, Douglass was invited by the Ladies Anti-Slavery Society of Rochester, New York, to give a speech on July 4th. He chose instead to speak on July 5th, addressing an audience of about 600 people at Corinthian Hall. The political climate was very tense as the country was deeply divided over the issue of slavery. The presidential election, as you heard in his speech, of 1852 saw three parties vying for power, with politicians debating on how to handle the growing conflict between free states and slaveholder states. A conflict that you all know eventually erupted into Civil War. Adding to the tension, as you heard a little in his speech, was the Fugitive Slave Act. And there were two, but this one I'm talking about is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which required runaway enslaved people to be returned to their owners. Now, for decades, the Underground Railroad had provided a path to freedom for the enslaved fleeing the South. However, the new law mandated that U.S. Marshals, federal officials, and everyday citizens help apprehend, runaway enslaved folks, even in free states. Those who refused or assisted runaways face severe penalties. The federal law overruled state laws that had previously protected runaways, making it illegal for law enforcement officials to apprehend in northern states. So for 1 second, I'm going to just take you back so you can understand the gravity of this situation. I'm going to take you back to the drafting of the Constitution. So the drafting of the Constitution included 3 key clauses that dealt with slavery. The 3/5 clause, the importation clause, and the one that we're going to talk about today, the fugitive slave clause. These 3 clauses were the most prominent clauses of the Constitution that dealt with slavery. However, interestingly enough, the word slave or slavery was never mentioned in the original Constitution. Anybody know why? Say that again. They did not want to do it at that time. And they actually called them persons, and you know that the 3/5 clause debated that, but they either said people in servitude or persons, but it never mentioned slave or slavery in the original Constitution. So more specifically, the Fugitive Slave Clause granted slave owners the right to retrieve the enslaved regardless of whether the states recognized slavery or not. The clause in the Constitution was not heavily debated at the time. The other 2 clauses were. This clause and the importation clause was heavily debated. This one was not. Even though, as we know some time later, this actually becomes one of the most major points of contention. The Fugitive Slave Clause left much to the interpretation, leading to conflicts like one of the famous cases, Prigg versus Pennsylvania case, where Mr. Edward Prigg, a Maryland man, was convicted of kidnapping after capturing a suspected enslaved person and her children in Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Prigg, establishing that federal law superseded state measures that interfered with the Fugitive Slave Clause. In response, several states then passed several legislation to bar the use of state facilities for fugitive slave rendition and to prohibit state officials from participating in the process. Additionally, abolitionists used the courts and even threatened violence to frustrate slaveholders. So due to the mounting tensions and the threat of the southern states seceding from the Union, Congress finally passes the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So as stated, this new law compelled citizens to insist in capturing runaways, denied enslaved people the right to a jury trial, and increased penalties for interfering with the rendition process. It also established a federal bureau with the enforcement power, placing control of individual cases in the hands of federal commissioners who were actually paid more for returning a suspected runaway than from freeing them. This law was met with even more impassioned criticism and resistance than the laws before it, setting the stage and the background for Frederick Douglass's speech. Douglass knew this tension at the time of the speech. Additionally, Douglass was keenly aware of the symbolism and hypocrisy of delivering a speech at a celebration of the Declaration of Independence, a document that proclaimed, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, while he and others like him remained enslaved." So he used this opportunity to remind his audience, and the audience was mostly abolitionists, of the profound injustices placed on Black Americans. The July 4th celebration of white Americans, he stated, were the mournful wails of millions, whose heavy chains were made more intolerable by jubilant shouts of freedom. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me, he declared. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought strikes and deaths to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. David Blight, a history professor at Yale and author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, explained that Douglass sought to expose hypocrisy of a society that celebrated liberty while maintaining a brutal system of slavery. Despite the harsh realities, Douglass remained hopeful, as you heard at the end of his speech, that change was possible through collective effort. He believed that while American principles and ideas were noble, it was up to the American people to live up to them. Douglass's message resonates with me deeply for so many reasons, but particularly in today's time. His call for justice and unity across divides continues to be relevant today. We must strive to uphold the values he championed and work together to create society where all people are truly free. Thank you for listening to me today. I succeeded on not allowing my papers to fly away.
Let's hear it for Kiana Pierre St. Louis. Yes, thank you again. So, 5th year, folks. 9 people have their 5-year pin. That means they've done this reading 5 years as of today. There goes Lee and Margaret up in the carillon, giving us the end to our speech. I would like the 9 to come up here to get a picture. So if you'll hang around a little bit, visit, whatever you want to do, explore our beautiful cemetery, minus the chain link fence that's been up there for 60 years. So thank you again for coming, and readers, thank you very much. See you next year.